what man's reason can conceive and his heart can contain. And here we are dealing with actions that transcend our human grasp. Yet, this is what happened. Millions were condemned to death, not for any crime, not for anything they had done, but only because they belonged to the Jewish people. And the development of technology placed at the disposal of the destroyers efficient equipment for the execution of their appalling designs. This unprecedented crime, carried out by Europeans in the 20th century, led to the adoption of the concept of a crime unknown to human annals even during the darkest ages, the crime of genocide. The calamity of the Jewish people in this generation was the subject of consideration at a number of the trials conducted in the wake of Germany's defeat in World War II, when mankind resolved to set up instruments of defense through the establishment of courts and execution of judgments, to ensure that the horrors of war which our generation has witnessed shall not recur. But in none of those trials was the tragedy of Jewry as a whole the central concern. It was among the subjects treated. Sometimes it was given great weight. Always it evoked sentiments of horror, but it was never at the center. Since they accused that these trials were indicted for crimes against members of various nations, there was only one man who had been concerned almost entirely with the Jews, whose business had been their destruction, whose place in the establishment of the iniquitous regime had been limited to them. That was Adolf Eichmann. If we shall charge him also with crimes against non-Jews, committed as it were by the way, this is because we make no ethnic distinctions. But we should remember that the mission of the accused, in which for years he saw his destiny and calling, and to which he devoted himself with enthusiasm and endless zeal, was the extermination of the Jews. Men still ask themselves, and they will certainly continue to ask in days to come, how could it have happened? How was it possible in the middle of the 20th century? The judges at the Nuremberg trials also asked themselves this question, examined its various aspects, and arrived at an interesting formulations, yet it would be difficult to claim that a full or satisfactory answer was given. I doubt whether in this trial we on our part will succeed in laying bare the roots of the evil. This task must remain the concern of historians, sociologists, authors and psychologists who will try to explain to the world what happened to it. But we shall nevertheless endeavor, however briefly, to sketch in the background in an attempt to explain what is perhaps altogether inexplicable by the standards of ordinary reason. Hitler, his regime and crimes were no accidental or transient phenomenon. He did not come to power as a result merely of a unique combination of circumstances. It may be doubted whether in general there are accidents in human history, for historical processes are in general the product of many developments, like many streams flowing each in its own channel until they unite into a mighty river. They will come together only if their flow is in the same general direction. No doubt, various events contributed to the rise of Nazism. The defeat of Germany in World War I, the subsequent economic difficulties, lack of leadership and futile party divisions, fratricidal strife and disunion, all these imperiled the German people, disoriented and groping to turn its eyes towards the false prophet. But Hitler would not have been able to remain in power and to consolidate in his support all the strata of the German people, including most of the intelligentsia, to get the support of so many university professors and professional men, the civil service and the whole army. If the road to his leadership had not already been paved. Not even the oppressive regime of the concentration camps and the atmosphere created by the terror so rapidly activated against all opposition by the hooligans of the SS and the SA are adequate alone to explain the enthusiastic and devoted support he received from the majority of the nation, unless it had been preceded by an extensive spiritual preparation. When we read today the declarations of the scientists, authors and journalists, including many who had not been among his adherents before, who chanted his praises and willingly gave him their support and backing, how they willingly and joyfully accepted his yoke, we must reach the conclusion however reluctantly, that the people were ready and prepared to crown him as their leader. Professor Wilhelm Röpke of the University of Marburg said this clearly at the end of World War II, and I quote, "There have been Hitlers everywhere and at all times. But it is Germany's shame that so miserable a figure should become her leader." In order to germinate, the seed of Nazism had to find a favorable soil. It found it in the German Reich, and the Germans, such as they had become in their political, spiritual, economic, and social history. In Goethe's In Goethes Dichtung and Wahrheit we read his prophetic description of a demonic personality like that of Hitler. And I quote, "Against him, no union of moral forces can make a successful stand. In vain will men of enlightenment seek to scorn him or unmask his true character as a cheat and deceiver. The masses are drawn after him." Yet, it is doubtful whether in this instance the majority of enlightened ones tried to make such a stand. As Professor Julius Ebbinghaus wrote after the war, and I quote, "The universities of Germany did not come forth when it was still possible to do so, to oppose openly and with all their might the destruction of science in the democratic state." And here is an example. In 1937, the author and art critic who used the pseudonym of Wolfgang Brieger wrote in an article entitled "When I Hear That Voice," dealing with Hitler's speeches. In 1937, he wrote, "Those hysterically ranting manifestations of self-exaltation, hate and thirst for vengeance." And I quote, "During all these last years, I have always had the same experience when I heard that voice. It has always seemed to me that the voice was speaking directly to me. It was to me, the anonymous one among millions of auditors, that it spoke. It wanted me to be better, to show me the way, to make me a German. And that voice insinuated itself mysteriously into the core of my being. It removed the bonds behind which my ultimate faith had been. It broke through the innermost doors, dissolved with its fervency all my doubts, suppressed in me the faint-hearted dog, and awakened the hero to action." What was it that voice was saying to its enthusiastic and ardent listeners? It spoke of the cult of hatred and power, of Germany's mission to rule peoples and nations. It spoke of battle in the spirit of Treitschke, who had preached war as a necessity for the survival of the state. It spoke of the supremacy of the Aryan race, that master race whose destiny it was to rule over all inferiors and to institute the new order in the world. So he wrote in his programmatic book, My Battle, Mein Kampf, and I quote, "All that we see before us
of technology which we see before ourselves, this is the creation of the Aryan. This fact leads to the well-based conclusion that he alone represents what we understand by the word man. He is the Prometheus of humanity, out of whose brow the divine spark of genius sprang forth for all the ages, to be ever rekindled at that fire which as knowledge illuminated the night of the silent mysteries, and so enabled men to rise and be sovereign over the other creatures of this earth. It is thus no accident that the first cultures developed were the Aryan, encountering inferior peoples, subjugated them and made them subordinate to his will. So long as he mercilessly maintained the position of master, he remained not only master, but also the upholder and propagator of culture. But when the peoples he had subjugated began to raise themselves up and to approach the level of the conqueror, the definite barrier between master and slave fell. The Aryan surrendered the purity of his blood, and therefore lost the paradise that he had created for himself, and lost the possibility of cultural creation. Hitler denied the existence of a common basis for all humanity. According to his doctrines, there is no mutual responsibility between men. In place of the injunction, "and thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself," we find, "crush him that is unlike thyself." Instead of the ideal of human brotherhood, we have the principle of race superiority. Distinguishing characteristics were assigned to the son of the master race. The skull was oblong, the complexion bright and splendid, expressing spiritual elevation. The word Aryan in Sanskrit signifies master. The Aryans are of the Indo-Germanic stock, whose most highly developed branch is the Teutonic, and the choicest of the lot are the Germans. They, and only they, should rule the world with an iron hand, and they must not defile themselves by contact with other races. The purity of the race and its preservation against pollution became the immutable foundation of the Nazi political program. This was the new order that Hitler promised his people, on which would be based a Third Reich that would last a millennium. Only those whose blood was Aryan were worthy of citizenship. This was established by the Nuremberg laws. The preface to the law for the preservation of the German blood and the German honor began as follows, I quote, "Penetrated with the knowledge that the purity of the German blood is a primary condition of the survival of the German people, and inspired by a firm resolution to ensure the future existence of the German nation forever, the Reichstag has unanimously adopted the following law," unquote. Then began the campaign to pervert the truth of Nazareth. It was proved that Jesus was an Aryan in whose vein no drop of Jewish blood flowed. The scientists undertook to formulate the basis of an Aryan science. Professor Philip Leonard, the physicist, Nobel Prize winning, undertook to establish a German physics in opposition to the Jewish science represented by Einstein. According to such theoreticians of racial doctrine as Hermann Gauck and others, non-Nordic man is closer to the animals than to the human race. The believers in the racial doctrine created the concept of the subman, Untermensch, to describe those who are not Aryans. Only the Nordic peoples have the aptitudes for leadership. Such was the teaching of Professor Valentin Miller. Institutes were established in Nazi Germany devoted to racial research and the determination of the hierarchical pyramid of racial superiorities. The Jews found themselves at the bottom of the list, followed only by the Gypsies and the Negroes. Hatred of the Jews, now called anti-Semitism, was not invented by Hitler. It had existed for many generations. Roots are in the disastrous dispersion of the Jews, in ignorance and prejudice, superstitious and envy. Stupid people have always hated those who differ from them, those who are exceptional. But the Nazis converted anti-Semitism into a doctrine of hatred, which started with hostility and culminated in murder. It was a spontaneous and irresistible development. He that gave free rein to hatred for the Jews had taken the steep path that plunged down to the day of boycott against the Jews on April the 1st, 1933, to the Kristallnacht of November the 10th, 1938, to the physical extermination decision on July the 31st, 1941. This was the logic of events, each of which evolved from the one before and led inevitably to its successors. The way of anti-Semitism led to Auschwitz. Hitler knew that for the success of his lying doctrines, he would have to use the age-old weapon of hate. He needed to place before the German people an object to which could be attributed everything loathsome and contemptible.
Prisoner may sit down. And can replace the earphones if he wishes to do so. shall read now decision number 4 and decide that the opening speech by the prosecution will be taken down by stenographers as laid down in my protocol of the 30th of June 1961. Please, the prosecution, the Attorney General.
When I stand before you, judges of Israel, in this court to accuse Adolf Eichmann, I do not stand alone. Here with me at this moment stand 6 million prosecutors. But alas, they cannot rise to level the finger of accusation in the direction of the glass dock and cry out, "J'accuse," against the man who sits there. Because their ashes have been piled up in the mounds of Auschwitz and the fields of Treblinka, or spilled into the rivers of Poland, and their graves are scattered throughout the length and breadth of Europe. Their blood cries to heaven, but their voice cannot be heard. Thus it falls to me to be their mouthpiece and to deliver the heinous accusation in their name. The history of the Jewish people is steeped in suffering and tears. In thy blood live, as Ezekiel wrote, is the imperative that has confronted this nation since it made its first appearance on the stage of history. Pharaoh in Egypt decided to afflict them with their burdens and to cast their sons into the river. Haman's decree was to destroy, to slay, and to cause them to perish. Khmelnytsky slaughtered them in multitudes. They were butchered in Petlura's pogroms. Yet never down the entire blood-stained road traveled by this people, never since the first days of its nationhood, has any man arisen who succeeded in dealing it such grievous blows as did Hitler's iniquitous regime and Adolf Eichmann as its executive arm for the extermination of the Jewish people. In all human history, there is no other example of a man against whom it would be possible to draw up such a bill of indictment as has been read here. The most terrible crimes of those fearful figures of barbarism and bloodlust, Genghis Khan, Attila, or Ivan the Terrible, the telling of which curdles our blood and makes our hair stand on end with horror, deeds that have become a proverb and a taunt, and an everlasting abhorrence to the nations. These almost pale into significance when contrasted with the abominations and the murderous horrors which will be presented to you in this trial. At the dawn of history, there were examples of wars of extermination, when one nation assaulted another with intent to destroy, when in the storm and passion of battle, peoples were slaughtered, massacred, or exiled. But only in our generation has a nation attacked an entire defenseless and peaceful population, men and women, greybeards, children and infants, incarcerated them behind electrified fences, imprisoned them in concentration camps, and resolved to destroy them utterly. Murder has been with the human race since the days when Cain killed Abel. It is no novel phenomenon, but we've had to wait until this 20th century to witness with our own eyes a new kind of murder. Not the result of the momentary ebullition of passion or the darkening of the soul, but of a calculated decision and painstaking planning, not through the evil design of an individual, but through a mighty criminal conspiracy involving thousands, not against
אני פותח את הישיבה השישית של
sixth session of the trial.
בית המשפט נותן את ההחלטה
The court will now read the following decision number 3.
אחרי הקראת כתב האישום,
After reading out the indictment, Dr. Servatius, the defense counsel for the accused, voiced two preliminary arguments regarding the invalidity of the judges sitting in this court, and the second regarding the lack of competence of the court to judge upon the counts in the indictment. We shall deal with the two matters in their order, and we shall reason our decision. Regarding the first argument and regarding the second argument, we shall at this stage only read out our decision without reasoning the decision at the moment. Regarding the invalidity of the judges, Dr. Servatius said that the accused fears that the judges will not be able in this case to be unprejudiced. This fear is not against one judge in particular, but against the 3 judges being members of the Jewish nations and citizens of Israel. The counsel for the defense says that it is to be feared that the memory of the catastrophe and the Holocaust, which exterminated their people, this, which is the background for the counts and offenses in the indictment, may influence the judges and may impair their ability to do justice. He also requested that every one of the judges examine himself if his personal suffering or the suffering of his relatives during the years of the catastrophe invalidate him from sitting in judgment. And this is our reply to these arguments. The subject of the indictment is the responsibility of the accused to the acts described in the indictment. And when these acts are being clarified, it will not be difficult to safeguard the interests of the accused according to the procedure of our criminal code ordinance, that everyone appearing before the court is innocent and his judgment will be declared only in accordance with the evidence brought before this court. Those who sit in judgment are professional judges, used and accustomed to weighing evidence brought before them, and do their work in the public eye and the criticism of the public. Learned lawyers and counsels defend the accused. And as far as the fears of the accused regarding the background, which is the background for this case, we must only repeat what has been said and what holds good in all courts, that when a court of judgment sits to judge, the judge is still a human being, flesh and blood, with feelings and senses, but he is ordered by the law to restrain those feelings and senses, because otherwise there will never be a judge fit to sit in a criminal case where the abhorrence of the judge is aroused, like treason, murder, or any other serious crime. It is true that the memory of the catastrophe and the Holocaust stirs every Jew, but when this case has been brought before us, it is our duty to restrain those feelings when we sit in judgment in this case. And this duty we shall keep. After weighing all arguments brought by the counsel for the defense, the learned counsel for the defense, the court finds, and each judge finds himself fit to sit in judgment. Dr. Servatius' reservations regarding the competence of this court branched out to two sub-branches. The first regarding the circumstances whereby the accused was brought from abroad, and the second regarding the validity of the law against Nazis and their collaborators, punishment 1950, according to which the accused was indicted. Regarding those reservations, the prosecution and the defense put before us arguments in writing and verbally. We express our appreciation to the work done by the counsel for the defense and the prosecution for the high standard of their argumentation, and after fully reading and studying, we have come to the conclusion that this should be the arguments brought by the counsel for the defense should be rejected. Our competence to sit in judgment lies in the mentioned law, and we do not think that there is enough ground to the objections raised by the counsel for the defense, not even in the international law, as far as the validity of the law regarding place and regarding the time. We also reject the argument brought forward by the counsel for the defense regarding an act of state, as far as such acts of state were aimed against the competence of this court. And regarding the arguments about the circumstances whereby the accused was brought to this court, we found that this court is competent to sit in judgment, and therefore, according to the law, there is no importance to the way the accused was brought within the jurisdiction of this court. Also, there is no importance to be attached to the fact if he was arrested abroad by messengers of the state. Regarding an act of state, as far as such acts of state were aimed against the competence of this court. And regarding the arguments about the circumstances whereby the accused was brought to this court, we found that this court is competent to sit in judgment, and therefore, according to the law, there is no importance to the way the accused was brought within the jurisdiction of this court. Also, there is no importance to be attached to the fact if he was arrested abroad by messengers of the State of Israel, the government, or otherwise. Therefore, it is not necessary to hear the witnesses Tohar and Shimoni, who were invited by the counsel for the indictment not guilty.
Do you
plead guilty or not guilty to count number 5?
Im Sinne der Anklage nicht schuldig.
In the spirit of the indictment, not guilty.
Do
you admit guilty or not guilty to the 6th count?
Im Sinne der Anklage nicht schuldig.
In the spirit of the indictment, not guilty.
Do you
plead guilty or not guilty to the 7th count?
Im Sinne der Anklage nicht schuldig.
In the spirit of the indictment, not guilty. Do you plead guilty or not guilty to the 8th count?
Im Sinne der Anklage nicht schuldig.